All right. Okay. Everyone, thank you for joining us tonight and welcome to our discussion. I'm Britton Ellis with Christina Holt and Amy Tipler. She'll be joining us on Facebook Live, perhaps eventually. We're from the Leroy Collins Leon County Public Library, and we're here tonight to discuss voters' rights, specifically reinstating voters' rights. And we are joined by an impressive panel of experts on the workings of our democracy and voters' access. They are Paula Hill, chapter leader of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition in Leon County, Mark Schlackman, senior program director for the FSU Center for the Advancement of Human Rights at the College of Law, Clerk Gwen Marshall, clerk of the Circuit Court and comptroller of Leon County, Kenneth Kent, civil courts director for the clerk of the Circuit Court and comptroller of Leon County, Mark Early, supervisor of elections, and Bill Proctor, the Leon County commissioner. Tonight, our discussion is going to be led by Leon County community leader, Talithia Edwards. And before we get started, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First, all attendees will be muted and cameras will be off during this program. We would like for you to please submit your questions for our panel using the Zoom Q&A tab. Facebook viewers may type their questions in the Facebook chat. And you can use Zoom's chat function to make comments and insights, and please be respectful. Your questions will be addressed at the end of the panel discussion, and this program is being recorded. Now I would like to introduce our moderator, Talithia Edwards. Ms. Edwards is a wife and mother of 7 turned community leader and advocate. She is currently the president and founder of the Greater Bond Neighborhood Association, and she often partners with other organizations and local city and county government to help bring positive change to her community. She has quite a powerful list of changes she has implemented in her own community, and we are delighted that she has agreed to take the time to meet with us today to facilitate this important conversation. Welcome, Talithia.
It's Zoom. We gotta remember to unmute. Thank you, Britton. It's so glad to be here tonight to moderate this panel with such illustrious people. So we're gonna jump right into it, and I'm gonna do a more formal introduction of our panelists tonight. We have Ms. Paula Hill. She is the chapter leader of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition in Leon County. Ms. Hill has a passion and dedication to support all those fighting to vote. Currently, she is working with the coalition of local organizations and community members to launch a local bail fund to help people get free and stay free. She started as one person with 7 strikes, but today those 7 obstacles have become 7 beautiful opportunities. In 56 years of living in the rolling hills of Leon County, Ms. Hill finds she knows now better than ever what to do, who to serve, and how to best advocate for the most vulnerable members of the Tallahassee community. Welcome today, Ms. Hill. Next, we have Mark Schlackman. Mark Schlackman serves as Senior Program Director for the Florida State University Center for the Advancement of Human Rights at the College of Law. He serves as Principal Investigator for the Center's Rethinking Civil Rights Restoration in Florida. Prior to joining FSU's faculty in 2002, Mr. Schlackman held several senior positions in the state and federal government, including Assistant General Counsel and Clemency Aide, and then Special Counsel to Florida Governor Lawton Childs, Special Advisor to Governor Jeb Bush during his initial several months in office, and Senior Advisor to Governor Buddy McKay. Amid the governor's tenure, a White House Special Envoy to the Americas during the 2 final years of the Clinton administration. How impressive. Welcome today, Mr. Schlackman. We also have our Clerk of Courts, Gwen Marshall. Clerk Gwen Marshall was elected Clerk of the Circuit Court and Comptroller of Leon County on November 8, 2016, making Clerk Marshall the first woman and African American elected to serve in that capacity. Prior to running for office, Clerk Marshall worked 17 years for the Florida Clerk of Courts and Comptroller Association, advocating and serving the independently elected 68 Clerk of Courts and Comptrollers for the state of Florida. As a devoted public servant, dedicated civic leader, and effective manager, Clerk Marshall brings a determined energy to the clerk and comptroller's office and operates from a viewpoint that everyone has equal access to justice. I like that. Welcome, Clerk Marshall. Next, we have Kenneth Kent. Mr. Kent is the director of the civil courts with the Leon County Clerk of Court, Circuit Court, and Comptroller. He has worked with the Clerk of Court since May 2017, and during that time, he has also served as Assistant Treasury Manager and Interim Finance Director. Before that, he worked for 25 years with the Florida Association of Clerks of Courts, including 11 years as the Executive Director. During that time, Mr. Kent worked on a number of projects, including the Florida Local Government Investment Trust, the Florida State Disbursement Unit for Child Support Payments, and the Florida Clerk e-filing portal. Welcome, Mr. Kent, to this panel today. We also have Mark Early, our Supervisor of Elections. Mr. Early is serving his second term as the elected Supervisor of Elections. He began his elections career in the fall of 1986 and played an integral role in the adoption of the Leon County's first optical scan paper ballot voting system in 1990. That system remained in place for more than 20 years. He also played lead role in the design and development of a groundbreaking election management system that is used by jurisdictions across the country, and a new post-election audit system which uses vote visualization technology to bring a new level of transparency, security, and validation to the elections across Florida and the United States. Glad to have you, Mr. Early. And last but definitely not least, our County Commissioner, Bill Proctor. Bill Proctor has been a member of the Leon County Board of County Commission since 1996. He represents the citizens of the Leon County District 1, which includes the central city of Southside areas. Commissioner Proctor has engaged in many diverse activities, providing leadership, creativity, and vision for our community. The breadth of his service includes church, community, higher education, federal, state, and local government. He has also served on several community advisory boards and has received numerous awards and recognitions for his public service. Some of his accomplishments include the building of the B.L. Perry branch of our library system and the Southside Richardson Lewis Health Center, and chairing the 50th anniversary of the Tallahassee bus boycott. Welcome to all of our panelists, and we thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, our topic will be focused on reinstating voters' rights, Amendment 4, and voter access during not only this upcoming election, but future elections. I'm excited about this conversation. I'd like to remind all attendees to please post your questions in the panel, to the panel in the question and answer tab located somewhere on your screen. For me, it's at the bottom of my screen, and we will get to them as we move through this panel tonight. I'll also ask my esteemed panelists to keep your answers as brief as possible so that we may get through all the questions. In addition, we have focused our questions to specific panelists. However, if you are a panelist that feels that you can expound on or give more information to a question that's been asked to a particular panelist, please feel free to jump in. So we're going to get started if you're ready. Everybody ready? Thumbs up. All right. Okay. The first question is for Professor Slackman, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
You are.
Okay. All right. Can you give us an abbreviated history, Professor Slackman, of what has happened since Amendment 4 was passed in 2018? Where does it stand now, and can it be overturned?
Yeah, perhaps what I can do is to hit a few points here. So maybe first to address the underlying cause for the ballot initiative. If we do some quick comparisons, during the 4-year term of Governor Charlie Crist, and the Clemency Board in Florida is the governor and the cabinet, 155,000 people regained their civil rights to vote, serve on a jury, and hold public office. In the 8 years after, under Governor Scott and the Florida cabinet, about 3,500 people regained their civil rights to vote, a stunningly small number. Research in 2016 conducted independently indicated that Florida's policies, highly restrictive policies, were responsible for nearly, and this has to be said a certain way to kind of validate the statistics, but for those post-sentence, after finishing essentially their sentences, Florida represented nearly half of all felony disenfranchisement throughout the entire United States. A remarkable number. And Florida is the third most populous state, but that does not explain those figures. So because of that, just jumping ahead as quickly as possible, there was perceived cause to do something different. And that something different was a ballot initiative. And that's what became known as Amendment 4. There are a lot of details that I'll kind of skip over unless we want to circle back to. But the people of Florida voters approved that ballot initiative in November of 2018 by nearly 65%. And then I'll just bring this in for a landing and we can circle back to this. So what's happened since? Well, as many people know, the Florida legislature passed enabling legislation that restricted application of that amendment by requiring full payment of fines and fees and restitution. That was immediately challenged in federal court. In late May of this year, May 24, I believe, Judge Hinkle, Federal District Court Judge Robert Hinkle here in Tallahassee, the Northern District of Florida, issued a ruling essentially stating that requiring payment of fines and fees and restitution from a constitutional analysis was analogous to a poll tax. And essentially, and Supervisor Early was involved in that litigation. Maybe he'll share some anecdotes with us later. But his ruling essentially was that people could not be deprived of the voting franchise by requiring payment of fines and fees and restitution. That, his decision was appealed by the state of Florida, the governor and cabinet sitting as the clemency board. So his decision actually last Tuesday, which was, interestingly enough, on the primary election day in Florida, U.S. Circuit Court for the 11th Circuit, that's the federal appellate court in Atlanta that hears appeals of federal district courts in the Southeast, heard oral argument on that. So despite some reporting that indicated the U.S. Supreme Court had weighed in, the only thing that the Supreme Court did is it refused to intervene at that time. So confused reporting by a wide number of media outlets. So here's the point. The legislation, the enabling legislation, and therefore to some extent Amendment 4, is in the balance right now, hanging in the balance of what the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals does insofar as Judge Hinkle's decision. How quickly it will rule, it's being expedited. But will the ruling be in time for the general election? Don't know. It's probably unlikely. But that's where we are. And whichever side the state or the advocates attempting to move forward as far as restoration of rights for those who had been convicted of a felony offense, whichever side does not prevail in this appeal in Atlanta will likely try for a petition of a writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court. So a number of steps left, but the point is that Amendment 4, which was anticipated to have broad application to, I think, reportedly 1.4 million people, the vast majority of those are subject to a fine, a fee, or cost. And we have a great panel here because Clerk Marshall can help us better understand how the process works and who is subject to fines and fees. But hundreds of thousands of people who are initially believed to have relief under Amendment 4 may not, depending upon how the court decides. So that was longer than I intended, but it kind of puts things in context, where we are, where we're not, and then we can go from there.
No, that was great. So powerful Amendment 4 being passed, and this 1.4 million people are thinking that they have this right, in relief under Amendment 4 to probably, we don't know, not have it. So aside from that challenge of the courts going back and saying, hey, should they have a right to have to pay the fines in order to do it, in the state holding one position, and now going all the way up the ladder to the different courts, are there any other legal challenges or suits that you see that will limit the implementation of this constitutional amendment?
Well, I mean, it's an open question. I mean, the people have asked whether the amendment itself is in jeopardy. Could conceivably a ruling by the appellate court or conceivably the U.S. Supreme Court revisit the whole concept of the amendment. So there are many different scenarios there, but clearly the issue of requiring payment of fines and fees and restitution is squarely before the court for purposes of those who cannot afford to pay. I mean, some would argue that Judge Hinkle's decision was too narrow, that it really, payment shouldn't be required at all given the voting franchise is at issue. And it doesn't mean, to clarify, that doesn't mean that people would be relieved of their obligation to pay fines and fees and restitution. They just wouldn't have to do so to regain the right to vote. They'd still be required to pay. You asked about other potential litigation. Well, just to state very briefly, as a lawyer, there's always other potential litigation. And I can tell you that another set of issues that isn't necessarily a part of the current litigation, perhaps an equal protection challenge. Because we could get to a point where there are 67 different counties in Florida. Well, we're at that point. We have 67 different counties in Florida. But the issues, as far as how these issues are handled, say, by the supervisors of election, by the clerks of the court, if there are significant differences throughout the various counties, given that the voting franchise is at issue, that could conceivably be challenged in federal court at a later date based upon the equal protection or lack thereof. And this, again, not to delve into it too much more, but alternatives to payment could even result in some litigation because, for instance, there is a provision in the enabling legislation that would allow, under certain circumstances, for conversion to community service. But interestingly enough, the conversion rates are different throughout the state. So this is far from settled. And initially, as you framed it, what was initially anticipated to provide relief for nearly 1.5 million people, it's been much more highly restrictive than that. So the current litigation is focused squarely upon payment of the fines, fees, and costs, restitution. But there could be other litigation in the offing as well.
That was really good. Thank you. And I don't want to belabor this point, but we're here to talk about voters' rights. You are setting the framework for us to dig into the other panelists and what they do and how they fit into it. You touched a little bit on it, but could you tell us, before Amendment 4, Professor Seligman, what did Florida's clemency laws look like? How did they compare to the rest of the country's clemency laws? You scraped it, but just set it up for us.
All right, I was just being mindful of the time. So here's the quick gist. Amendment 4 is not clemency. First point. It's an alternative. So what was the pre-existing set of circumstances? Well, the governor and cabinet had virtually unbridled discretion, complete and unbridled discretion, as to whether to grant what was called, and still is, civil rights restoration. So in Florida, when someone is convicted or specifically adjudicated for a felony offense, he or she loses civil rights, which include voting, serving on a jury, right to hold public office, also firearm authority, which is subject to restoration by the governor and cabinet, sitting as the clemency board, but that's handled separately for public safety reasons. So the before and after pending the appeal that's why I alluded to the differences in the number of people who regained their civil rights during, say, the Crist administration. Remember, it's not just the governor, it's the governor and cabinet. And then you compare it 4 years to 8 years, 155,000 people regained their civil rights in the 4 years during the Crist administration, about 3,500 during twice the time, 8 years of the Scott administration. So purely discretion, and until a court says otherwise, that is taken as a given in clemency. It's at the discretion of the governor and cabinet. And for people who are not familiar with the clemency process, to grant any form of clemency, whether it's civil rights restoration, a pardon, a commutation of sentence, or even involving death penalty review, the governor has to support it, any governor, or else it doesn't go forward. And then you need 2 of the 3 Florida cabinet members, the Attorney General, the CFO, or the Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So that's how this works. That's the quick or not so quick, what was then and what is now. But Amendment 4 is not clemency. It's an alternative means to deal with these situations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of those answers and really helping us understand our the context of what we're talking about today. And now to you, Mr. Kent, I have a question. Can you tell us what the clerk office, what role the clerk's office plays in reinstating voters' rights?
Yes, as the custodian of court records, the clerk is responsible for maintaining both the documents filed in a case along with the financial records for that case. In other words, the clerk maintains the case file, including the judgment and sentence, and when people owe court costs, fees, and fines, those are paid to the clerk's office, who then receipts those payments and updates the court record. For people seeking court records, they will come to the clerk's office to get copies of those, along with information on any amounts that are owed to the court. So in order to get their rights restored under the current process, they would need to come and get the amount owed to the court, plus a copy of the judgment and sentence, because there could be other types of amounts that are owed to other entities as well.
Sure. Thank you so much for that. Clerk Marshall, this question is for you. How many people does Amendment 4 affect in Leon County?
Well, that's an ambiguous question there. Right now, essentially anyone with a felony conviction in Leon County, we estimate it could be anywhere upwards for several hundreds of thousands of people, but we don't have the exact number.
Wow, that's a lot of people that can be potentially affected. Mark Early, this question is for you. How many Leon County residents have had their rights restored? And what is being done in Leon County to register people that are now eligible to vote under this constitutional amendment?
Yeah, so as to the first question, how many people have had their rights restored? As Gwen said, we don't really know what the sum total of people who don't have their rights is, and we don't really know exactly how many people have had their rights restored. Amendment 4, the way I think of it, it set up a constitutional framework where those rights were automatically restored pending certain completions of sentencing. That has been, to say the least, a moving target as the cases have worked through the courts. And what I can tell you is that on January 8th of 2019, we had well over 100 people come to my office on a Saturday to get registered to vote. We saw increases in registration throughout that spring and summer that we somewhat attributed to the to Amendment 4 and the restoration of rights movement there. but it's really hard to put a specific number on that. I think one of the things that people don't understand is that in many regards, it's transparent to my office. Unless somebody actually presents and says, hey, I'm a convicted felon and I'm registering for the first time, we don't really know. There's Senate Bill 7066 laid out multiple check boxes on the registration form that had locations where people could check on the form that they were a convicted felon. That was deemed, I'm not sure, I guess Mark Schlockman can tell us exactly how the judge ruled on that, or how he called that, but he essentially ruled that as being illegal. And so all along, we've been using the original voter registration form. So we don't have any real tracking mechanism to see how many people have been registered and because of getting their rights restored. But it's in the hundreds with, probably I would guess conservatively near 1,000. I've heard estimates that easily more than 10,000 people in Leon County could be among the people who have been disenfranchised because they don't have those rights restored. But again, that's a very much of a moving target. As far as what we're doing now to try and get people registered, my office has been working very closely with quite a few different groups. The Big Bend Voting Rights Restoration Council, and I always get their name wrong, but it's along those lines. Pastor Greg James, many members of the community pushing hard to get people to understand that they don't need to be afraid to try and get registered to vote. If they feel confident in their heart that they've completed their sentencing, and they can sign that oath with a clear conscience to the best of their knowledge, then they can go ahead and get registered to vote. Of course, if you're still in serving prison sentence time or on parole or probation, clearly you haven't completed the terms of your sentence. But if it's legal financial obligations, as was brought out, I think, throughout the court cases, and even there was a big work group that was initiated after the court cases that went from August to November, that many clerk of courts testified at. It's very difficult for convicted felons to actually know with very much confidence how much they do owe, especially for older cases, how much they have paid. If they paid some, they may not know exactly how much. And some of these, some forms of the payments get converted to civil liens, and many times then the clerk of courts aren't involved in tracking. And frankly, I think even if it's not converted to a civil lien, the restitution parts of those payments is very rarely tracked by the clerk of court. So there's not any good documentation out there. I will say I was just involved in a conversation yesterday with the state's attorney, and I had a whole list of questions that I had written up that I actually forwarded recently over to Mark Schlockman for your review, sir. Based upon an FAQ that the state put out within the last, say, 2 weeks. And that really generated more questions in my mind than answers. One thing of note, and this is the last thing I maybe to say right now, is that while there's a lot of fear about getting registered to vote, and because people haven't completed necessarily or don't know the status of their completion of their financial obligations, nobody that I know of, certainly not in Leon County because I would absolutely know about it, but nobody in Florida that I know of has had their rights taken back who got registered, and then the state declared that they had not paid all their legal financial obligations, because the state has not sent those what we call felons packets to the supervisors of elections to initiate that process. We only take people off the rolls, A, once they're registered, and B, once we get information that is credible and reliable from the Department of State stating specific reasons why somebody is not eligible. So all of this concern about people being registered and removed from the rolls because of financial obligations, it's really more the first part. It's preventing people from getting registered in the first place because of fear and uncertainty about what their status is. So I think trying to clear up that and remove some of that fear that, you know, if you think you've paid all of your fines and fees and restitution, then I would say go get registered. But if you're uncertain, and that's where most people are, that's where the big problems come in. And that's what we're trying to clear up through these court cases.
You know, we have, here I did a few voters registration drives, and I had a few concerns of my own that I came and asked you. I think that we have to remove barriers of fear with education, right? This is a simple fix. If people who are on probation or whatever, they're seeing a parole officer. So instead of having the burden on your office and people ask, hey, can I register? It is very simple. A probation officer or someone in that field that's connected to those who are re-entering could provide that information and say, hey, by the way, you're done, you can register to vote, right? So I think that we have steps, but it's a little bit of re-education and a reworking the system so that people can vote, or like you said, just register and figure it out later. If you get something or that says they can't, then they come off the road. But my grandma would say nothing beats a failure but a try, right?
I agree with that.
So, yeah, me too. So thank you so much for that, Mark Early. My next question is to Ms. Hill. Ms. Hill, you are a part of the local Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. How did you become involved in that organization?
Well, actually, I'm the chapter leader for Leon County for Florida Rights and Restoration Coalition. And we're a grassroots organization that is purely built by returning citizens to help returning citizens. And what I do as a chapter leader for Leon County is I seek out returning citizens to train them on their rights and what they need to do to become productive citizens in society. And I also help those people to know what it is to become voter ready, to know how to do and find out about their fines and fees, how to research and get the information that they need. That entails, if they don't have to wonder, do I owe fines and fees? Am I going to be penalized? I train them on what they're supposed to do. If they need to know as far as, do I owe fines and fees? That's a simple call to the clerk's office or logging onto the website. And once you log onto the website, you can go and find your final judgment. And you can get that and you can print that. There's two parts to the final judgment. It's the part where the judge sentences you. It tells you what your complete sentence is. Then there's the other part that tells you about your fines and fees. So it's actually separate. And see, a lot of people think it's one legal document, and that's where we all get confused. So it's actually, if they really look at it, I'm sentenced, and that's my sentence. The fines and fees is actually separate. So they're making they're making it look like it's all combined, but it's actually not. So it's my job as chapter leader to explain to them what they need to do it. So if they join a chapter, and we have 20 chapters around the state of Florida. So if they join a chapter, they can always go on our website and we can help them. They can always ask questions. I'm the chapter leader for Leon County. It's my job to make sure that they know what it is and to ask questions. So if they join a chapter, they're never without information, and it's my job to make sure them. As far as how I got involved with the Florida Rights and Restoration Coalition, it was purely by luck. It was because they had Advocacy Day, and I signed up for it, and I went to the Capitol. And I wanted to become involved because it's too many returning citizens that get a bad rap. We don't get what we need. I personally felt like when I came back, I should have the right to vote. When I came back home, I became gainfully employed. I pay taxes. So if I'm not allowed to vote, why should I have to pay taxes in a city or in a state where I'm not allowed to speak where my tax dollars go? And that's how I felt. So I joined this organization to do what I could do to fight back for my rights to vote. And that's why I became involved with this organization.
Oh, yeah. I think that's powerful. So share a little bit with me about what the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition did leading up to Amendment 4 before it got on the ballot. And now that it's passed, what's your focus?
Okay, so before Amendment 4 got on the ballot, what we did was we knew that we had to fight to get this thing off the ground. There were people that wrote the law, that wrote it, but what we did as an organization is we went out, knocked on doors, because in order to get something on, the thing, in order to become a law, you have to go out and you have to get petitions signed. You have to get the community involved to sign the petition that we want this law where people that are coming back into society gets the right to vote. So what we did as an organization, we went out and we knocked on doors in the heat, in the cold, and we got all these signatures that was needed to get this thing on the thing, so the people could actually vote for it. And that's what we did. We talked about it. We went out and we talked to people and we asked them, how do you feel about returning citizens voting? We don't say convicted felons, we say returning citizens, because that's what we're doing. We're returning to society. And we got these people involved in how they felt, and we got those petitions signed so that this thing could get on the ballot to be voted for. So it's like, to me, when Governor DeSantis and all these people that are against us voting, it's like you're slapping not just us in the face, you're slapping the people that voted for you and some of these legislators, you're slapping them in the face because they had spoke. They spoke. They wanted them to vote. They wanted us to vote. So you're not just saying no to us, you're saying no to the people that actually voted for you. So in my personal opinion, the voting right is not just a right. There's the constitutional right. That's a right that should never have been taken. People fought years ago and died for that right for people to have. So it should never have been taken in the first place. And we're never giving up. It's an onward fight.
And so that's right. So that's your focus now, is continue to push to make sure that Amendment 4 stays Amendment 4, and returning citizens, keep that right.
Right.
Wonderful. Commissioner Proctor, are you still here? I think I said that Commissioner Proctor left.
He's here.
No, I'm still here. It takes an hour to get to the commissioner. I'm not used to taking that long to get to me, but I'll wait.
All right, come on, listen, I got a question for you, sir. In your opinion, what benefits do you see for returning citizens having their voices heard via the act of voting?
Well, they can vote against Governor DeSantis. They can vote against bad judges. They can vote against bad state attorneys. They can vote against bad commissioners, and they can fight for others who have more progressive voices. So there's a lot in which the vote does to arm and to allow these citizens to be respected as citizens. But unfortunately, we're in a climate of a very high degree of civil and civic illiteracy. And a person coming out of jail, there is no civics class offered in prison. There are few civics classes offered in schools. And we're even actually desiring for our children to go back to school on Monday, and none of them going to be talked to about voting and how to vote against the people who have forced them to go back into those classrooms. So when the illiteracy rate is as great as it is right now, all of us are vulnerable, but it has to be a conscious effort on the good people like our supervisor, who actually is pro-voting, our clerk of court, who is actually about pro-voting and respecting the rights of citizens, and who understand that the fight for voting is what the 15th, the 19th, the 26th Amendment, the Voting Rights Act, all of these special categories of law, which have always been to do what? It has been to suppress, to deny, and to keep certain people from voting. So as long as there is the perception that sociologically speaking, the people coming out of prison are of poor echelon and they're marginalized, Republicans are going to fight a partisan battle, and the Democratic Party must therefore be the voice that seeks to secure the rights of those who Republicans have markedly drawn their lines in the dirt. And everybody from the governor to the senators to the representatives are aligned to fight against a class of people based on sociology. So if the Democratic Party don't reach out in this low degree of civic literacy, their vote really won't mean that much. But I hope that they will get the right to vote so that they can vote in the next election, this election, for the right people who are running. Thank you.
All right. That was a loaded answer with so much in it, Commissioner Proctor. You know, the literacy rates and the people who are being marginalized. Like if we look at that 1.4 million people, how much are African American and those from lower socioeconomic class who voting the decisions that are made policy-wise affect us more, right? Because we don't have our voices and being heard. That was so much in what you said, and so many different levels and so many systems that cross that I think we're looking at, you know, the supervisor of election officers or grassroots people getting these people registered. But this is such a cross-sector issue, and I think you made that very clear in your answer. Thank you so much for that answer. Mr. Ken, I'm coming back to you with this question. If people who owe money to the government through unpaid traffic violations, unpaid taxes, and the sort are allowed to vote, why then there are people who are returning citizens that are not allowed the right to vote when essentially owing money to the government is similar to unpaid traffic violations or taxes? In other words, why are these fines treated differently?
Well, this really is a policy issue, and I wish I could elaborate more on that, but it's really a decision that's made, you know, at the state government level. The clerk is charged with carrying out certain functions and does so as required by law. The duties of the office are often referred to as ministerial, in that the clerk is not a party to the cases and is instead the custodian of the record for those cases. So I really can't give you an answer to that question. That's really something that would be directed to the legislature, the governor, other statewide elected officials.
Yeah, at one point, there is an easy answer, although it gets right back to some of the issues that Kenneth was just describing. The easy answer, which doesn't mean it's necessarily a well-founded answer, is that's what the legislature determined. I mean, that's what's being litigated right now. And it's even more complex, which we may not have time to delve into, but initially the fines, fees, costs, and restitution when in preliminary proceedings before the Florida Supreme Court, one of the key proponents of Amendment 4 said before the court that payment of fines, fees, costs, and restitution was required to avail oneself of Amendment 4. Here's the problem there. The preliminary proceeding, which every ballot initiative goes through a similar process, and the preliminary proceeding before the Florida Supreme Court only has jurisdiction to look at two issues: whether it is a single subject, whether it deals with one subject, or whether the ballot summary language matches the language on the petition. That's it. Nothing more. It's not to weigh in on the merits of whatever's proposed or to say that it's a good idea or a bad idea. Single subject, does the ballot initiative, does the summary language match the petition? So all of the other deliberations before the court and who said what to whom, can't say it's irrelevant, can't dismiss it entirely, but it wasn't controlling. I think, as Paula may be aware, there was a brief point in time where the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition more or less took the same position. That fines, fees, costs, and restitution must be paid. But again, all of that was not binding. And the only thing that the Florida Supreme Court was doing was determining single subject, whether the ballot summary language matched. Well, the legislature, not surprisingly, voted essentially along party lines to follow that lead. So, you know, the lines between what was a Democratic or what was a Republican initiative, clearly Senate Bill 7066 was passed virtually on partisan lines. The Republicans passed the legislation. But the prior conversation was complex. Commissioner Proctor made some interesting observations and compelling given the nature of these issues, there is a disproportionate impact upon minorities. Say that another way, what to borrow a Department of Corrections term, the black population. Disproportionate impact, undisputed, not necessarily majority. There's a majority white population, and not to say that demographic voting dispositions should control. They shouldn't. It's like whether one's a Republican, a Democrat, unaffiliated, black, white, other, neither. We're talking about a voice in one's governance, and that's where Florida continues to be the outlier throughout the entire United States. Doesn't mean that there aren't problems elsewhere. There are. But Florida has continually been the outlier in this regard. So sorry for weighing in, but I just wanted to try to connect some dots and some things that sometimes aren't necessarily mentioned.
No, that was good. That added a lot of clear line. I have my own ideas of what I think, how we got here, but I'm just moderating. You all are doing a great job with answering those questions. So thank you so much. My next question goes to Mark Early. What are the current options registering to vote? What are the current options registering to vote for returning citizens have who owe money to the courts via restitution?
Well, of course, one option is to complete the payments that the court imposed. The other is there's still the option to seek executive clemency. That is still a viable option, although I don't know that there's been any of those recently since Amendment 4 passed. I've not really heard of any. Certainly not a large number in any sort of fashion. There are options, though, as you can seek the courts to, let's see if I can get the wording right. You can have the court, you can petition the court to terminate your legal and financial obligations, but you have to have the consent of the, I guess, the victim of or the person that's owed that money. So if it's restitution, the person was the victim of the crime, or the courts, or the clerk's office where the fees might be owed, they have to weigh in and support that decision of the judge, and the judge would have to make that decision based upon, how he viewed the petition and then the agreement or non-agreement from those other entities. Or, and this was discussed briefly earlier, the court has the option to convert the financial obligations to public service, community service. But the conversion levels, again, there are disparate throughout the state. And, the hours versus dollars equation there can vary greatly. So that's really, at this point, really the only options. And again, for people that have been in prison or out of prison for quite a while, and there's a large number of those, it's very difficult to even find out what you owe. As Ms. Hill was pointing out, for people that are just now being released, there is a lot better information. But there's this big backlog of people that have been waiting years and years and decades to get their right to vote, and it's just not right. And I think Judge Hinkle recognized the problems inherent there and was trying to, do what was equal and fair to these citizens of the United States.
Right.
Alethea, Mark brought up a point that maybe if you are open to, maybe Clerk Marshall can just clarify. There arguably is a conflict, an inherent conflict in terms of waiving fees and the implications for waiving fees. So, defer to you as moderator, but Clerk Marshall may be able to give us some additional insight into how fees and fines are used to fund certain aspects of, the clerk's office, for instance, or the courts.
Yes, that was the follow-up question for her to weigh in on the same question from her vantage point. The same question that I asked Mark Early. What are the options for registering voters, returning citizens who owe money to the courts and via restitution?
Well, let's just start with the restitution part. The clerk does not track restitution. Actually, the county probation office is the one who oversees that. Far as court costs and fines, we ask that all the inmates well, not inmates, but once they've been released, to contact our office. We have various options available. One, we try to put them on a payment plan because we recognize that they won't probably get gainful employment until a couple of months after their release date. However, they still are required to pay the full obligation before they can actually get their rights restored at this time. So that is one of the options. When it comes to waiving fees, I think there's some misunderstanding about, well, there is a lot of misunderstanding about how that process works. Actually, Professor Slackman mentioned, essentially the legislature determined that the funding for the court system should be paid off the backs of the individuals who use it. So unfortunately, we use those fines and fees to support court security, court operations. As far as my office, we also get a percentage. And Ken could help me out with this. We have how many trust funds that we allocate different costs and fines to?
Well, just for a traffic ticket, I think it's 13. I looked at just a felony conviction right before this webinar, and there were 9 different trust funds for a standard felony conviction. When you look at the judgment and sentence sheet, there's 25 different total costs that could be incurred depending on the type of conviction. So it's a large number. It includes everything from court costs to fines to costs to reimburse costs of prosecution, costs of public defense. So all of those get rolled into it, and they're all paid for by the users of the system. And then there's also, on the civil side where I work, there's filing fees. Those are used to cover the cost of the whole court system, not just the civil side. Traffic tickets, there's a lot of things that go into the court system. And there is funding from the state of Florida and support. We're very fortunate. Thank you to Commissioner Proctor and the other commissioners for their support of the court system. But all of that, even after all that's done, it's a system that's stretched very thin. And on top of that, the clerk is bound by certain state specified performance measures. So the office is obligated to collect at least a certain amount from each of these types of court cases and report that on a quarterly basis to the state. And if the clerk isn't able to meet those performance standards, the clerk has to provide a corrective action plan. So those are some of the challenges and obligations that the clerk is trying to meet, as well as meeting the needs of the public.
So I think the biggest misconception about the process is not like a credit report. These fines don't fall off after a certain amount of years. I and the other clerks throughout the state, we do not have the legal authority to waive court costs and fines. Like Kenneth Kent mentioned, we are held accountable on a quarterly basis to collect a certain percentage that's determined by a statewide average. So we have multiple challenges here at the clerk's office when it comes to the collection of court costs and fines.
Ms. Edwards, could I weigh in on that?
Yes.
So what you hear is that even when the person has served their time, it forces the clerks to become post-convicted prosecutors. They have to become prosecutorial in their attitude as well as in their pursuit of money or post-sharecropping funds from the inmate. Well, Attorney Slackman probably is chronologically more astute on the date lines, but when we worked for Governor Childs, our legislature supported the courts, and we had an understanding that the courts would be properly funded. But since the Childs administration, we have seen the plug being pulled on courts being funded, and we have our judges across the street as lobbyists, foot lobbyists, trying to keep the courts afloat. And the pressure being turned to and shifting to the courts to, I won't say extort, but to be hard, prosecutorial on people who are walking out busted and disgusted and depressed and repressed and suppressed. So the clerk cannot be a humanitarian. The clerk cannot be someone who's neutral. The clerk has to be against the patron who is the ex-convict, because they've got to stay afloat, or otherwise, as Mr. Kent has said, justify what you're going to do about this. And this is really awful. And Mr. Slackman may have, for the record, a more precise chronological line of when and how our legislature withdrew support of our court system. In Florida, I don't know where we rank, but our courts should be funded, but our courts are not. And the pressure that's placed upon court operatives to go after the persons who are in front of a system has been an amazing shift in the last 20 years. Thank you.
If I may, Commissioner Proctor, I think is exactly right. He's hit the nail on the head. This is a structure that does not have to be set up this way. It was set up this way. It has the direct effect of putting clerks, of course, like clerk marshal, in a position where they cannot be advocates for the people that they're mostly serving. They have to be in a situation where they're placing more burdens and pressure and can't do what they think is right necessarily. So it's just the way it's structured, and until legislation changes that, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do, but it's not right.
I agree that that's not right. Mr. Early, while you're speaking, most may know the answer to this question, but all may not. For those who have completed all of their financial obligations and are ready to register, do they register the regular way, or is there an additional paperwork that they have to complete?
Yeah, again, and that's why I can't really give you exact numbers of how many people have had their rights restored and now become registered to vote. We have the option of using what I think is a very deficient version of the voter registration form that has multiple different check boxes that are very confusing. And as Attorney Schleitman pointed out, I was on the stand with Judge Hinkle during the court case, and we were discussing the Florida voter registration application as designed by the legislature, the new version. And it's just a horrid document that has so many problems with it that it's much more confusing than anybody can really figure out. There's big gaps in who's even allowed to get registered if you have to check one of those boxes. So we've been using the old form, which we do have the ability and right to do. And there's only one checkbox. It's the same for everyone. And it says essentially, my rights to vote I've never been convicted of a felony, or if I have, my rights to vote have been restored. And everybody checks the same box. And so if you have paid all your fines and fees or feel confident that you've completed that process, then you just go fill out your voter registration application and you are registered to vote. It's very, very simple. If you make a mistake and it turns out that you had not completed all of your legal financial obligations, payments of those, really the worst that can happen to you is that you go through an eligibility review and you're taken back off the rolls. And lacking some kind of obvious intent to defraud, nothing more is going to happen. And I think all the state's attorneys that I've talked to, certainly Jack Campbell, but his association that kind of is a grouping of all of the state attorneys throughout the 67, well, it's not the 67 counties, all the different circuits. They've all, I think, agreed to that point of fact that without credible evidence that somebody's trying to defraud by signing that oath, the worst that's going to happen, you're not going to be prosecuted for a felony if it turns out that you made a mistake in going and getting registered. So you can get registered to vote and you can vote.
But Ms. Edwards, I want to just say that in District 1, the chilling effect is that when you come out of jail or prison, you are under a lot of stress not to be in violation of your probation, not to be in violation, have to repeat, Because if you get picked up for any little thing, you feel like you're going to get picked up and hauled back automatically. So what our supervisor just expressed, that it's not widely reported that nothing is going to happen if you check that box wrong. But this whole intimidation effort is just a variation of the theme of law and order and get hard on criminals. And what we're talking about is a wholesale, widespread intimidation, fear, and threat where the poor inmate coming out believes, if I check that box and get in trouble and Jack Campbell finds out, I'm back down the river. So it's a part of a mass effort to intimidate and to take the appetite away from persons who will come. But again, I say, like has been explained, there is civic illiteracy to the extent that the poor inmate doesn't come out with that understanding. Don't walk out with a card or a pamphlet on this is what you do next on voting. So without having that clarity, you're going to option toward the side of pure safety and not go down that road if it'll lead you back in trouble if you block the wrong thing and you're charged with fraud. Thank you.
And that's, if I may jump in, that sentiment has been expressed at every community forum I've been to, where, you know, returning citizens have expressed their opinion and told us why they have not gotten registered to vote, even if they feel very certain that they've completed all their obligations. They're just afraid to sign on that line because they're afraid they're going to go back to prison. And it's just a trade-off they're not going to make.
Yeah, that's why we got to do a better job of.
Yes.
That connectivity is a vital, you know, bridging that, gap as that they are on the right information and then they can register the vote. So this is a great conversation. Mr. Kent, what kind of fines are holding people back from voting? Is it just restitution or legal fees, or is it other type of fees as well?
There's several types. So let me go through these. This may take a minute or two. There are court costs, there are court fees, and there are fines along with restitution as ordered by the court. These costs are specified in statute, and there are others that the court may order, and I'll go into that in a little bit. Some of these include, as we mentioned before, the cost of prosecution, public defender costs, and court costs such as criminal justice, trust fund, and county crime prevention. Fines are, for the most part, discretionary and are based on the type of offense. It's also important to note that depending on when the case was adjudicated or when the case was decided, that the record-keeping systems may have changed. So record-keeping systems from earlier years aren't the same as today. For example, criminal cases prior to 1998, here in Leon County, court costs, fees, and fines were collected by the Department of Corrections through county probation officers. For those particular types of cases, people will need to seek information, unfortunately, from two different sources, from the clerk's office and then also from county probation if those records are available. The clerk doesn't have access to those. Also, as mentioned before, sometimes amounts owed are converted to civil judgment. The clerk will then need to calculate the amount of interest that accumulated over time on those judgments, provide people with the balance owed. Finally, restitution, which we've talked about, that is also paid through the county probation office. Again, people will need to get that information from the probation office since the clerk does not have those records. And then there can be other things that the court orders. And so before this meeting, I pulled a case file. I won't say it was as random, but I just picked a number and pulled the file for that number. I hadn't read the case. I wasn't familiar with it. But what I found in this case was the court further recommends, in this case, 1 year's driver's license suspended, and then $1 per month to the First Step program. So there's, in a case like that, we wouldn't have those records. The party would have to go contact the First Step program or somebody associated with it to find out whether or not they'd made that payment. And then $1 per month. Again, how do you determine what the number of months are? And I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying that's an example of other things that the court could order depending on the specifics of the particular case. So I hope that answers your question, at least in part.
It did. I didn't even realize that there was so many things. When you hear restitution, like, oh yeah, I hit somebody's tree, and so I got to pay the $200 to, to plant the tree back or something. You're not thinking about all of those things. And then we understand that we got poor people who you are assigning all these fines to.
Right.
So that is compounded with all the other things. So thank you for that answer. Ms. Hill. Yes.
If I can elaborate or summarize what Mr. Kent just spoke on, that was one of the major arguments in Judge Hekel's opinion, and we haven't really dove into that, is that we don't have a centralized database that tracks all of these court costs and restitution. So that has been a major challenge as well. Clerk's been working with FDLE for about the last 2 years trying to do a criminal justice data exchange project so we can get all the data, criminal justice data for the state of Florida in one database. But at this time, we made some small progress on that, but I don't think that project is going to be completed no time soon. But I just wanted to point out that is a major factor for consideration when we talk about the accessibility of being able to determine what your court costs and fines are.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Clerk Marshall. Ms. Hill, we're listening to all these fees and restitution and everything. Your organization is currently helping with fees. I heard, we read you all are doing a bailout program. Tell me a little bit more about that and how you're helping returning citizens with these particular fees.
Okay, well, the bailout program is a totally different program. But to date, the Florida Rights and Restoration has spent over $2 million on fines and fees for returning citizens around the state of Florida. And what we do, we have a fines and fees program. So I think I need to explain the difference in restitution and fines and fees. Restitution is if you steal my necklace or I steal your necklace, that necklace may be sentimental to you. So restitution is I take your necklace, you want that necklace paid for. So regardless to whatever, that's different from fines and fees. That necklace has to be paid for. So that's not what we pay for. So fines and fees, it's like court costs and fines and fees, like they just explained. So what we do is that we want all returning citizens to have the right to vote. So when they tack on all those fines and fees, we have a program, it's the fines and fees program. And if a person has issues paying fines and fees, they can call 1-877-MY-VOTE-0. And that'll connect them with the fines and fees program. Or they can log on our website and look for fines and fees and go in and fill out the box for their respective counties. And they'll be hooked up. So it doesn't take, like, it's not overnight. They have a lot of people that's logging on, and we help them pay their fine. Well, they basically pay the fines and fees at no cost. People donate money. Recently, LeBron James donated $1 million for us to help out. People are always donating money because they want these people to vote, and they feel like it's a worthy cause. So if they want help, they can reach out to one of the chapter leaders around the state, or they can get on the website and do. We pay fines and fees because we want our people to vote. I'm just one person, but there's 1.4 million people behind me. I go to the I go to the state legislators. I go to the senators. I talk. I call. I've talked to Mr. Early. I've spoken with Mr. Proctor. I speak to everybody because this is important. We're all citizens, and we all should have the same right. I don't understand why Governor DeSantis and all the other people make such an issue about us voting. Sometimes I think it's because they think we're going to be Democrats. They don't know what we're going to be. We may not want to be Democrats or Republicans. We may just want to vote. It's important, and I think me being chapter leader, I've spoken to a lot of the returning citizens, and some of them have issues with wanting to vote because they have the fear, like people have decided, and it's not about them not wanting to pay. We come home after doing time, and we've lost everything. I can speak for myself. I lost everything. I didn't have anything. So when I came home, I didn't know if I was going to stay in a shelter or I was going to live with my family. So I was just starting back over. It's not that we're trying to neglect our obligation. It's just that we want a chance to start over. And I kind of used, when I talked to a senator, I said, if you had a daughter that you love or a child that you love the most in the world, and that child needed a surgery that would save their life, and the doctor told you how much it would cost, and you said, okay, do the surgery, and the doctor said, no, in order for me to do the surgery, you have to pay me first, but you know you didn't have that money, how would you feel? And he said, I would feel devastated. I say, so that's how all of us feel when you say that we cannot vote because we can't afford to pay our costs, fines, and fees before you allow us to vote. So people have to take their political parties, representation, and all that stuff out of everything and to decide how the other people feel because they've done something. There's not too many families in Florida. I don't care how much power you exert, there's not too many families that haven't had someone in their family to break a law. So I just feel that some of us have to understand that money is not that important when it comes to somebody just wanting to vote. So if they want to vote, and if Florida Rights and Restoration can help them, look up our fines and fees department. And if you live in Leon County, I'm the chapter leader, look me up, and I'll do my best to help you get connected with the fines and fees programs. Because we want to vote, and we want all of them to vote. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. We are cutting it close, and we ask individuals to drop questions. So I'm gonna ask Professor Slackman a question. I'm gonna end the panel questions with a question for Commissioner Proctor. So we've talked about an array of things, but Professor Slackman, what we did not touch on was voting in detention centers. Can you further expound on voting access in detention facilities and what's the conversation around that particular topic right now?
Yes, Ms. Edwards, I appreciate the question. 67 counties, once again, throughout the state of Florida. In 60 of those 67 counties, the sheriff is responsible for detention at the local or county level, often called detention facilities, in many instances previously jails. Given research, this past April, approximately 45,000 people statewide are in detention facilities. Here's the key distinction between Amendment 4 and these issues, although they sometimes get conflated. People, by and large, in county detention facilities, again, also known as jails, haven't lost their civil rights for the most part. They're either serving a misdemeanor sentence. In Florida, you don't lose your civil rights for being convicted of a misdemeanor, or they're pretrial, awaiting trial with no disposition yet. So they have their voting eligibility intact, although they're confined. So in many instances, it's an access to voting issue rather than a restoration of civil rights or voting eligibility issue. And the challenge is significant. I'll just close by telling you I've had the privilege of coordinating closely with a grad student in FSU's College of Social Work, Elaine Webb. She's in the process of researching the approaches taken by the various counties. And as you can imagine, the research is still preliminary. I think she's had responses from about half of the counties, including Leon. And some counties do very little, if anything, to help facilitate access to voting. Some counties apparently are engaging in supervised voting right there on site. And maybe the best way to close this is we are very fortunate in Leon County because the critical relationship here is between, for the most part, the sheriff and the supervisor of elections. In Leon County, both Supervisor Early and Sheriff McNeil, and for that matter, the commission and other officials are absolutely determined and dedicated to protecting the right to vote, voting eligibility, and to facilitating access. So the relationship between the supervisor and the sheriff is strong. In fact, progress is made. And Mark, I know we have limited time, but maybe you could share one quick example of what you did just before the registration deadline. But there's more work to do. And I can tell you just based upon direct engagement that I know that Supervisor Early, Sheriff McNeil, with the support of the commission and others, are determined to do it. So Mark, I don't know how much time we have left, but I think you did something extraordinary just before registration deadline.
Yeah, I can go over this real quick. Back in February, we actually were doing our kind of our normal outreach to the jail to make sure prior to book closing before every election, we can reach out and make sure that the inmates that are in the detainees that are in the detention centers are registered to vote and have access to request to vote by mail ballot. Things kind of shut down a lot, though, with the pandemic, and there was an outbreak at the detention facility, so we were not able to go in there. But what we were able to do was go ahead and, instead of sending our people in, which we can no longer do, was declare that the detention facility itself is a branch office for voter registration. So they are actually acting like our libraries now to make sure that detainees have the opportunity to get registered, and they have the forms there and access to computers so that they can request vote by mail ballots online and get registered online so that we can actually deliver voting materials to them once they've been registered. So book closing for the November election is October 5th. We'll be reaching out to them again to make sure that, you know, they've got a myriad set of responsibilities there, but make sure that they're focused on that as that deadline appears to ensure that everyone that is a detainee and is eligible to vote gets that opportunity. And again, that's through a good partnership with myself and Sheriff McNeil. And as Professor Schlockman said, I think Leon County is blessed with an overarching attitude that these rights, the voting rights, need to be preserved, and the eligibility needs to be protected.
Totally agree. Totally agree. We're wrapping up our panelist questions. Commissioner Proctor, this is kind of a loaded question, but I know you can handle it. You wrote in an article, you were quoted saying that Amendment 4 closes a Jim Crow loophole from the 1965 Voters Act. We've seen how it's been hard hit and people have come at it in all type of ways. How do you feel about the way the amendment is being challenged recently? And with one of your areas, District 1, 32304, hardest hit with COVID-19, how do you think that has affected voter turnout? And you wrapping us up.
Okay, I like to defer a part of my response to the supervisor of election. We need to know, and I'm not sure that it's well known, that our supervisor is the vice chairman of the 67 supervisors across the state, and that in terms of COVID-19, what they have asked of the governor and the governor's failure to respond to the needs of supervisors across the state in light of COVID-19, I would rather, if not being uppity or anything, but I think that it's more significant to know that the governor is treating the whole state as if they are, well, they're suppressing the vote. That's what they're doing. And they're placing a chilling effect upon the state, and they're trying to suppress and keep numbers as low as possible. But with all due respect to our time, may I please ask Mr. Early to give a more comprehensive response than the little itty bitty statement on 32304, Ms. Edwards. I think that his the revolution that we're up against here, he would do a better job. So I would like to just defer and ask Mr. Early to tell all of us about the failure of the state to prepare for elections And we've seen Kentucky, we've seen Georgia, and Florida ain't going to be no better. Please help us to understand the bigger issue to the question that I was asked by Ms. Edwards.
Well, certainly there's been significant challenges our association. I am the vice president of our association. I'll be the president in 2 years. And that gives me a position of leverage where I can really kind of hold the association's feet to the fire and hold, in many ways, the executive branch of our state to the fire by putting documents and very public requests from elections officials asking for what we know is needed. Some of that was expanded early voting opportunities, the ability of funding for increased vote by mail. We didn't get much of what we asked for, frankly. We knew that there would be poll worker shortages and concerns with that. The one thing we got was, and it really only helped Leon County, frankly, was an agreement that state workers could take more time off and be poll workers. So we've taken great advantage of that, but that I think has had a minimal impact throughout the state. But a lot of what we'd asked for, it really has not, it really fell on deaf ears. And I think that's well reported. Having said that, here in Leon County, I think we've been very successful getting the word out about vote by mail, making sure people felt very empowered and confident that the contingency plans we had in place were going to be effective and safe and protect their vote. There's a lot of problems with the Postal Service right now, so we're putting other options out there, such as our drop boxes, making sure and giving much larger audience the ability to get a vote by mail ballot than has ever been done before. We're still looking at additional mailings out to each household to get registration requests for vote by mail in all voters' hands who have not already voted and have that request in. So I was just helping design the mailing that's going out in the next few days from my office to the 140,000 voters in Leon County who still have not requested a vote by mail ballot for the general election, to try and put that ballot in their hands. So that's kind of where our big effort has been. I think a lot of people have seen the drop boxes where you don't have to trust the mail. If you are concerned, and I understand the concern, that the mail delivery may be a problem, once you get your ballot, you can just mark it and take it to one of these drop boxes. And they're staffed by my staff, and we can collect those and make sure that they're signed well. And we have a very high rating as far as the number of ballots that with a very low number of ballots that we reject due to any kind of signature issues or even late ballots. So the communication with the public, and that's enabled by the great partnership we have with our county commission that allows us to be funded in lieu of some of the other funding sources that should be there but are sadly lacking.
Thank you much for that answer. I hope we haven't lost you, Mark, early, because I wanted to close out before I hand it back over to Britton with just a few voters registration deadlines, if
Sure.
we have those. And real quick, and then back to you, Britton. Thank you, everyone, for serving on this panel. We appreciate you.
So the October 5th is the deadline to get registered to vote in Florida. If you're registered in another county, it's just an address change, so you can actually make that change up through Election Day. If you want a vote by mail ballot, I would suggest strongly that you go online or call my office. The phone number is 850-606-8683, or go to leonvotes.gov. We have online request forms for vote by mail ballots. Again, get those requests early. The biggest enemy we face here is time. And that's because of potential problems with getting ballots delivered and returned. So waiting till the last minute is the worst choice. Get your requests in now. If you don't want to vote early, go ahead and request a ballot anyway, and make sure that you have that as an option should the pandemic get worse and problems with voting in person make it so you don't want to do that, but it's too late to request a ballot at that point. So go ahead and get those requests in early. If you want to try and vote in person, we've got 2 weeks of early voting. You go that first week. Don't wait till the second week when potentially lines might be longer. Things went very smoothly in the primary election. We had record turnouts here, one of the highest in the state and the highest in our history, or one of the top three, the third highest ever. But we're going to be seeing at least least double, maybe 2.5 times the turnout in the general election. So while that was a very smooth operation, it was only a warm-up, and we need voters to really empower themselves and take some responsibility to get the ballot in their hands and get out and vote. And as you know, that's how we change things, through voting.
Hey, thank you everyone, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Despite this being virtual, we feel your presence, and we are very happy that you have taken the time to explore such an important topic with us, the library. And don't forget to exercise your right to vote in November. And another way to make your voice heard in your community is by filling out the 2020 census. You have until September 30th to do this, and it's something that you could do at 2020census.gov. It's all online. And thank you again to our esteemed panelists for joining us tonight. The library has many educational and fun upcoming events that you can explore. And for a complete list, I put the link in the chat box. Just check it out. And thank you again for joining us tonight, and have a good night, and everyone stay safe.